I was standing in my kitchen when my phone buzzed, and 5 words ended 28 years of trying to belong. You're not invited to the wedding. No explanation. No apology. Just my mother's text message, cold and final, like I was some random acquaintance she decided to cut from the guest list. My hand froze. The coffee mug I'd been holding slipped through my fingers and shattered across the floor, but I couldn't move. I just kept staring at those words, reading them over and over, waiting for them to change into something that made sense. They never did. Here's what you need to understand about my family. We looked perfect. Beautiful house in the suburbs, luxury cars in the driveway, annual vacations to places most people only see in magazines. My parents threw dinner parties where everyone laughed too loud and drank expensive wine. Neighbors envied us. But nobody saw what happened when the guests left. My older sister Madeline got everything. And I mean everything. Her college tuition? Paid in full. Mine? We think student loans will teach you responsibility. Her first apartment? Down payment covered. Mine? You're 23, figure it out. Every achievement I worked for got a polite nod. Every minor thing Madeline did got celebrated like she'd cure disease. I learned early to stay quiet, to not make waves, to accept that some children are chosen and others are just there. And I accepted it. For years, I swallowed every dismissal, every comparison, every moment of being invisible while my sister sparkled. Until that text message. My sister was marrying some hotshot lawyer in Boston. 300 guests. Venue overlooking the harbor. Everything Madeline had been planning since she was 12 years old, complete with ice sculptures and a live orchestra. And I wasn't invited to watch her get it. I sank onto my apartment floor, right there in the broken ceramic, and spilled coffee, and something inside me cracked open. Not sadness. I'd cried enough tears over this family to fill an ocean. This was different. This was rage. But it was the cold kind. The calculating kind. The kind that doesn't scream or break things. The kind that plans. I thought about staying home. I thought about being the good daughter who accepts her place and doesn't cause problems. Part of me, the part that had been trained for 28 years, wanted to just let it go. That part lost. I picked up my phone and opened the message thread with my mother. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could ask why. I could beg. I could make her explain how a mother tells her own daughter she's not welcome at a family wedding. Instead, I deleted the thread. Then I stood up, swept the broken mug into the trash, and started packing a bag. Because here's what my mother didn't understand. Excluding me wasn't protection. It was permission. Permission to stop playing by their rules. Permission to stop being invisible. Permission to show up and let everyone see exactly what kind of family we really were. For hours. That's how long it takes to drive from Newark to Boston. 4 hours to second-guess myself. 4 hours to turn around and forget this whole thing. I didn't turn around. My mother had made a choice. Now I was making mine. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, my phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. It was from Sophie, my childhood best friend, the one who knew every secret, every wound, every moment of being second best in my own family. Her message was short. They uninvited me too. Call me. Now. My stomach dropped. Why would my mother uninvite Sophie? She'd known our family since we were 7. She'd been at every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every major moment of our lives. Something wasn't right. I called her back immediately, my hand shaking as I held the phone. Thank God you called, Sophie answered, her voice tight with something between anger and fear. We need to talk about your sister's fiancé. About why your mother really doesn't want us at that wedding. What are you talking about? He contacted me 3 months ago. Asked questions about you. Specific questions. About your father's will. About family money. About things only someone planning something would need to know. The hallway of my apartment building suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Sophie, what did he want to know? She hesitated. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He asked if you were the type of person who'd fight back. The memories hit me in waves as I drove, each one a reminder of exactly how long this had been building. Madeline was 3 years older, which meant she got to set the standard I could never reach. Straight A student. Captain of the debate team. Accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship that my parents happily covered the rest of. Me? I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college, then transferred to Rutgers. Graduated with honors, but by then, nobody was paying attention. Madeline had just gotten engaged, and that was the only news that mattered. I remember one Thanksgiving, I must have been 19, when I announced I'd made Dean's List. My mother smiled, said, "That's nice, sweetie," then immediately turned to Madeline to discuss wedding venue options. Madeline hadn't even set a date yet. She'd only been engaged for 2 weeks. But it didn't matter. In our family, Madeline's future, hypothetical wedding reception was more important than my actual academic achievement. The worst part? Madeline never seemed to notice. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. She moved through life assuming the world would arrange itself around her needs, because in our family, it always had. When our father died 4 years ago, that's when things got truly ugly. The funeral was on a Tuesday. I took off work, drove 6 hours through a snowstorm to get there. I walked into the funeral home, and Madeline immediately pulled me aside. "Try not to be too emotional," she whispered. "Mom's having a hard enough time without you making a scene." I hadn't even cried yet. During the service, Madeline spoke for 20 minutes about what an amazing father he'd been. She told stories about family vacations I barely remembered because I'd usually been left with our aunt. She talked about his wisdom, his guidance, his unconditional love. I sat in the second row. Madeline had taken the first, and realized I was mourning a father I'd never really had. Not the way she did. After the burial, there was the will reading. My father had left everything to my mother, which was expected. But there was a trust fund, meant to be divided between Madeline and me when Mom passed. Equal shares. Finally, something equal. Madeline spent the entire drive back to Mom's house talking about what she'd do with her half. A down payment on a bigger house. Maybe a vacation property. I stayed quiet, thinking about how mine would finally clear my student loans. 2 months later, my mother revised the trust. I found out from a lawyer's letter. The new terms gave Madeline control over distribution, to ensure family harmony. I never confronted them about it. What would be the point? But I remembered. I remembered all of it. Now, sitting in my car with Sophie's words replaying in my head, "He asked if you were the type of person who'd fight back," I was starting to see a pattern I'd missed. My exclusion from the wedding wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic. Someone wanted me away from that venue. Someone wanted me silent and absent while something happened. The question was, who? My mother, protecting Madeline from embarrassment if I caused a scene? Madeline, afraid I'd somehow ruin her perfect day? Or the groom, this man I'd never met, who'd apparently been asking questions about me for months. I merged onto the highway toward Boston, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Whatever they were planning, whatever they thought keeping me away would accomplish, they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated how much a lifetime of being invisible can teach you about seeing everything. The highway stretched ahead of me like an accusation, each mile marker a countdown to either the biggest mistake of my life or the moment I finally stopped letting my family erase me. I'd been driving for an hour when Sophie called back. "I've been thinking about this," she said, no greeting. The questions he asked weren't casual. He wanted to know about your relationship with your father, whether you'd ever contested the will, whether you kept in touch with your dad's side of the family. My grip tightened on the wheel. Why would any of that matter to him? That's what I can't figure out. But here's the thing, he also asked if you had access to any family documents. Old paperwork. Legal stuff. A chill ran down my spine despite the car's heater blasting. When was this? January. Right after he proposed. 3 months before my mother changed the trust fund terms. 3 months before I got cut out of decisions about my own inheritance. The timing couldn't be coincidence. "Sophie, did you tell him anything?" "Of course not. I told him to ask you himself if he had questions." He got weird after that. Said it wasn't important, that he was just trying to understand family dynamics before the wedding. I switched lanes, pressing harder on the gas. Boston suddenly felt both too far away and too close. "There's something else," Sophie continued. "I saw your mom 2 weeks ago at the grocery store. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept. When I asked about the wedding, she got this look on her face, scared almost. Then she said the guest list had to be trimmed for complicated reasons, and that I'd understand someday. She looked scared, terrified. I've known your mother for 20 years. I've never seen her look like that." We hung up, and I spent the next hour replaying every interaction I'd had with my family over the past 6 months. The awkward Christmas dinner, where my mother barely spoke. The way Madeline had seemed distracted, less smug than usual. The fact that neither of them had invited me to any wedding planning events, not even as an afterthought. I'd assumed it was the usual exclusion. Now I wondered if it was something darker. By the time I hit the Massachusetts border, I'd made a decision. I wasn't just going to crash the wedding. I was going to watch, listen, figure out what everyone was so desperate to hide. I had one advantage they didn't know about. I'd been saving money. Not much, but enough. While Madeline lived off family handouts and my mother complained about expenses, I'd been putting away every spare dollar for 3 years. For what, I hadn't been sure. An emergency fund. A safety net. A future that didn't depend on people who'd proven they couldn't be depended on. Now I realized I'd been preparing for this. Some part of me had always known I'd need resources they couldn't control. I pulled off at a rest stop outside Boston and checked my phone. The wedding was in 4 hours. I'd packed a simple black dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. The goal wasn't to make a scene. Not yet, anyway. I'd researched the venue online. Harborview Ballroom. Multiple entrances. Large enough that one extra person could slip in unnoticed if she was careful. There was a service entrance on the east side. I'd seen it in photos, half hidden behind decorative hedges. Catering staff would be rushing in and out. Nobody would look twice at someone in black, carrying herself like she belonged. I'd spent my whole life being overlooked. Today, that invisibility would finally work in my favor. As I pulled back onto the highway, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Don't come to Boston. You'll regret it. A friend. My breath caught. I stared at the message, then at the road ahead. Someone knew I was coming. Someone was watching. I pressed harder on the gas and kept driving. I parked 6 blocks from the venue, far enough that my car wouldn't be spotted in any wedding photos or by arriving guests. The afternoon sun was brutal, and sweat beaded on my neck as I walked, my heels clicking against the pavement with each step that brought me closer to a confrontation I still didn't fully understand. The Harborview Ballroom was exactly as pretentious as I'd imagined. Stone columns. Valet parking. A red carpet leading to doors wrapped in white silk and roses that probably cost more than my rent. I circled around back, staying close to the hedges, watching. The catering vans lined the service area. Staff in black uniforms hurried back and forth with trays, flower arrangements, sound equipment. The organized chaos of an event that had to be flawless. Nobody even glanced at me. I waited until a woman about my age stepped outside, pulling out a cigarette with shaking hands. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa, one of Madeline's bridesmaids from college. We'd met a few times at family events, back when I was still occasionally included. Rough day? I asked, stepping closer. She jumped, then her eyes widened. Oh my God, what are you doing here? I was invited. I lied smoothly. Last-minute addition. Vanessa looked confused, then uncomfortable. Your sister said you couldn't make it. She seemed really definite about that. Plans changed. I kept my voice light, casual. Is everything okay? You look stressed. She took a long drag, then laughed bitterly. This whole wedding is a disaster waiting to happen. The groom's been on the phone all morning having some kind of argument. Your mom looks like she's about to have a breakdown. And Madeline, she stopped herself. And Madeline what? Vanessa shook her head. Nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. You owe me one, I said quietly. Remember junior year? When you needed someone to cover for you with your parents? Her face went pale. She did remember. I'd lied to her conservative parents about where she'd been for an entire weekend, saved her from getting cut off financially. Fine, she muttered. But you didn't hear this from me. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Madeline's been crying all morning. She won't tell anyone why, but I heard her on the phone with the groom. She kept saying you promised me this was handled, and what about Colorado? Colorado. The same word I'd heard Sophie mention. Did she say anything else? Just that if it came out, everything would be ruined. Then your mom walked in and they both went silent. It was creepy. Vanessa stubbed out her cigarette and headed back inside, leaving the service door propped open behind her. I didn't hesitate. I slipped through. The back hallway was dimmer, cooler. I could hear music from the main ballroom, a string quartet warming up. The ceremony hadn't started yet. I had time. I followed the sound, staying to the shadows, until I reached a corner where I could see into the main space without being seen. It was obscene. Crystal chandeliers throwing rainbow light across white marble floors. Ice sculptures shaped like swans. Tables draped in cream silk with centerpieces that had to be 5 feet tall. Hundreds of guests in designer clothes, champagne already flowing. This was the world Madeline inhabited. The world where nothing was ever denied, where every wish became reality, where people like me were kept carefully out of frame. Then I saw my mother. She stood near the front, wearing a pale blue dress that probably cost thousands. But Vanessa was right. She looked awful. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her hands clutched her purse so tightly I could see the tension from across the room. She was talking to a man I didn't recognize. Older, gray hair, wearing clerical robes. The priest. He was shaking his head, looking troubled. My mother said something sharp, gestured emphatically. The priest's expression hardened. Then he said something that made my mother go completely still. She turned, scanning the crowd with wild eyes, searching for someone. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows. Whatever was about to happen, it was bigger than me crashing a wedding. The ceremony music began. The lights dimmed, and everyone turned toward the back of the ballroom. The string quartet shifted into a processional melody, something classical that I didn't recognize, but that probably cost a fortune to arrange. I stayed in my corner, hidden behind a decorative column and a massive flower arrangement. From here, I could see everything without being seen. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle first, all 6 of them in champagne-colored dresses that matched the roses. Vanessa was third in line, her face carefully composed now, hiding whatever stress she'd shown me outside. Then came Madeline. She looked perfect, obviously. Strapless, white gown that probably required 3 people to help her into. Hair swept up in an elaborate style with tiny diamonds woven through it. Professional makeup that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But I knew my sister. I'd spent 28 years studying her expressions, learning to read the microscopic cracks in her perfect facade. And right now, she looked scared. Her smile was too tight. Her steps were too measured, like she was concentrating hard on not stumbling. When she reached the front and took the groom's hand, I saw her grip it like a lifeline. I studied the groom for the first time. Tall, probably mid-30s, conventionally handsome in that generic way expensive grooming creates. Dark suit that fit like it was made for him, which it probably was. He smiled at Madeline, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man performing a role. The priest stepped forward, the same one I'd seen arguing with my mother minutes earlier. Up close, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at my mother in the front row like he was waiting for permission for something. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice amplified through the room's sound system. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Madeline and Trevor." Trevor. So that was his name. I'd never actually been told. The ceremony proceeded like every wedding I'd ever seen. Standard vows, standard readings, nothing remarkable except the sheer expense of the setting. Then, just as the priest was about to ask for the rings, he paused. The silence stretched too long. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Madeline's smile faltered. "I apologize," the priest said slowly. "But there's a matter that must be addressed before we can proceed." My mother stood up abruptly from the front row. "Father, we discussed this." "I'm aware of what we discussed, Mrs. Parker. But my conscience won't allow me to continue without." He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I need to speak with the bride and groom. Privately. Immediately." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Trevor's jaw clenched. Madeline's face went from pale to gray. "This is highly irregular," Trevor said, his voice carrying an edge of anger. "Nevertheless," the priest replied firmly, "it's necessary." I watched my mother and the priest engage in what looked like a silent battle of wills. Finally, she sat back down, her expression stony. Madeline and Trevor followed the priest to a side room, leaving 300 guests staring at each other in bewildered silence. The quartet tried to fill the gap with music, but it only made things more awkward. People pulled out phones. Whispers grew louder. I heard someone near me say, "Did the groom forget the license or something?" My mother sat frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead. For the first time in my life, I saw her look completely powerless. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When the side door finally opened, Madeline emerged first. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged. She'd been crying. Trevor came out behind her, his face flushed with anger. The priest followed, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last 15 minutes. They returned to their positions at the altar, but everything felt different now. Madeline's hands were shaking. Trevor kept clenching and unclenching his fists. The priest cleared his throat. "We will continue," he announced. But his eyes swept the crowd as he said it, and when his gaze passed over my hiding spot, I could have sworn he looked directly at me. Like he knew I was there. Like he'd been expecting me. The ceremony limped forward, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room could feel it, the wrongness, the tension, the sense that we were all watching something that shouldn't be happening. The priest rushed through the remaining vows like he was trying to finish before something exploded. Madeline's "I do" came out as barely a whisper. Trevor sounded more like a challenge than a promise. When the priest finally pronounced them married, the applause was scattered and uncertain. No one seemed to know if they should celebrate or offer condolences. The newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Madeline's smile so forced it looked painful. As they passed, I heard Trevor hiss something at her. She flinched. The reception began immediately after, guests flooding from the ceremony space into the adjoining ballroom. Waiters appeared with champagne trays. The DJ started playing something upbeat that felt completely at odds with the mood. I waited until the crowd thickened, then I stepped out from behind the column. No more hiding. I walked into the reception hall like I belonged there, keeping my chin up, my steps confident. For about 30 seconds, no one noticed me. I was just another guest in a black dress, moving through the crowd. Then someone's champagne glass hit the floor. The sound shattered through the conversation, and heads turned. A woman I didn't know stared at me, her mouth open. Then another person noticed. And another. The whispers spread like fire. Is that her sister? I thought she wasn't invited. Oh my God, this is going to be insane. I kept walking, heading straight for the center of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't let myself hesitate. Hesitation was what the old me would do. The invisible daughter who accepted whatever scraps she was given. That version of me died in my New York apartment when I read that text message. My mother saw me before Madeline did. She was standing near the head table, talking to some elderly couple, when her eyes landed on me. The champagne flute in her hand tilted dangerously, golden liquid sloshing over the rim. Every ounce of color drained from her face. For a moment, we just stared at each other across 30 feet and 28 years of accumulated hurt. I waited for the anger, for her to storm over and demand I leave. Instead, she set down her glass very carefully and started walking toward me. The crowd parted for her automatically, everyone sensing the confrontation coming. Phones appeared. Someone was definitely recording this. Madeline spotted me then. She'd been talking to a bridesmaid, but her head snapped around, following everyone's gaze. When she saw me, her entire body went rigid. The smugness I'd expected, that trademark, "I'm the favorite and you're nothing" expression, never came. Instead, she looked genuinely shocked, almost frightened. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, loud enough that nearby guests could hear. I opened my mouth to answer, but my mother reached me first. She grabbed my arm, not hard, but firm enough to stop me. Up close, I could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "You didn't give me a choice. I gave you exactly what I intended to give you." Her voice was strange, layered with something I couldn't identify. "But now that you're here," she glanced around at the watching crowd, then back at me. "Don't leave yet." I blinked. "What?" I said, "Don't leave." She released my arm and straightened her shoulders, her public mask sliding back into place. Not until after the toasts. Before I could respond, she turned and walked back toward the head table, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the reception with 300 people staring. Madeline pushed through the crowd, Trevor right behind her. This close, I could see the barely concealed panic in her eyes. "You need to go," she said, trying to keep her voice low. "Right now. Before you ruin everything." "Ruin what, exactly?" I asked. "Your perfect wedding?" Because from where I'm standing, it was already falling apart before I got here. Trevor moved closer, and I got my first real look at the man my sister had married. His cologne was expensive. His watch probably cost more than my car. But there was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. A coldness, a calculation. "Listen," he said, his tone condescending. "I don't know what kind of family drama you're trying to start, but this isn't the time or place." "Colorado," I interrupted. He froze. Just for a second, but I saw it. The flash of genuine fear before he covered it with confusion. "What?" "You heard me." Madeline grabbed his arm. "She doesn't know anything. She's just trying to cause problems." But her voice shook when she said it. I looked between them, my sister in her $10,000 dress and her new husband with his cold eyes, and I realized something. They weren't just worried about me making a scene. They were worried about what I knew. The problem was I didn't actually know anything. Not really. Just fragments. Pieces that didn't quite fit together yet. But they didn't know that. The priest seemed pretty concerned about something, I said carefully, watching their reactions. What did he tell you in that room? Trevor's hand moved to his pocket, pulling out his phone. Excuse me, he muttered, walking away abruptly. Madeline stared at me, her perfect makeup starting to crack around the edges. Why are you doing this? For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt something other than anger. I felt sorry for her. I didn't come here to hurt you, I said quietly. I came here because I'm tired of being erased. You were never erased, she snapped. You just weren't, she stopped herself. Wasn't what? Good enough? Important enough? Worth including? She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, leaving me alone again in the center of the room. The DJ was setting up his equipment nearby. I looked at the microphone sitting on his table, waiting for the toasts that were scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. My mother's words echoed in my head. Don't leave yet. Not until after the toasts. What was supposed to happen during the toasts? I pulled out my phone and texted Sophie. I'm inside. Something's wrong. The groom freaked when I mentioned Colorado. What else did he ask you? Her response came within seconds. He asked if you had access to your father's safety deposit box. Why? My father's safety deposit box. The one I'd forgotten existed until this moment. The one only I had the key to, because my father had given it to me the week before he died, whispering, "Keep this safe. Don't tell your mother or your sister. When you need it, you'll know." I'd never opened it. Never even thought about it after the funeral chaos. Suddenly, pieces started clicking together. The groom's questions about family documents. The changed trust fund terms. My mother's fear. The priest's intervention. Someone wanted something that was in that box. And they'd been trying very hard to make sure I stayed far away from this wedding. I watched Trevor across the room, phone pressed to his ear, his body language screaming stress. He kept glancing around, checking exits, measuring distances. He looked like a man planning an escape. The DJ finished setting up and tested the microphone with a quick tap. The sound echoed through the ballroom, drawing everyone's attention toward the head table where the wedding party sat. My mother was already seated, her face carefully neutral. Madeline picked at her plate, not eating. The bridesmaids and groomsmen made forced conversation, the kind that fills silence without saying anything real. Trevor returned, sliding into his seat beside Madeline. She leaned toward him, whispering something urgent. He shook his head sharply, cutting her off. They were fighting. At their own wedding reception. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the toasts. First up, we have the father of the bride. He passed away, my mother interrupted quickly, standing. I'll be giving the toast instead. She walked to the microphone with perfect posture, years of practice at pretending everything was fine evident in every step. The crowd settled into attentive silence. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice steady. Madeline has always been. That's when Trevor's phone rang. Not a polite vibration. A full, loud ring that cut through my mother's words. He fumbled for it, his face going red as everyone turned to stare. I have to take this, he muttered, standing abruptly and heading for the exit. Madeline's face crumpled. My mother's carefully prepared speech faltered. And something in me snapped. I'd spent my entire life watching my family pretend. Pretending we were happy. Pretending we were close. Pretending that some of us weren't slowly being erased while others got everything. I was done pretending. I walked toward the DJ booth. He was adjusting something on his laptop, not paying attention. The microphone sat unguarded on the table beside him. My hand closed around it. Actually, I said, my voice amplifying through the room, I'd like to say something. Every head whipped toward me. The DJ looked confused. My mother's expression went from shock to something that looked almost like anticipation. Madeline half stood from her chair. Don't you dare. Sit down, Madeline. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. For once in your life, you're going to listen to someone else talk. The room went completely silent. I looked out at 300 people I didn't know, all dressed in expensive clothes, all here to celebrate a union that felt more like a business transaction than a marriage. I'm Emily, I said, the bride's sister. The one who wasn't invited today. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. I wasn't invited because my family has spent 28 years teaching me my place. And my place was never at the table. Never in the photos. Never part of the story they wanted to tell. My mother moved toward me, but the priest, who'd been sitting quietly at a corner table, stood and blocked her path. She looked at him, startled, then stopped. What was happening? But I came anyway, I continued, because I was tired of being invisible. And when I got here, I noticed something interesting. Everyone seems really nervous. The groom keeps leaving to take phone calls. The bride looks terrified. And the priest almost stopped the wedding entirely. Madeline was fully standing now. Shut up. Shut up right now. So I started asking questions. I said, my voice growing stronger. About Colorado. About fraud investigations. About why someone might be very interested in gaining access to family assets through marriage. The crowd's murmur turned into loud whispers. Someone near the back shouted, "What's she talking about?" Trevor reappeared at the doorway, his face pale. When he saw me with the microphone, he froze. "The man my sister just married," I said clearly, looking right at him, "is under investigation for embezzlement. In Colorado, where he was working before he conveniently moved here and swept my sister off her feet." The room erupted. "That's a lie," Trevor shouted, pushing through the crowd toward me. "She's lying because she's jealous." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, holding it up. "Because I have text messages here from my best friend. Messages where you asked her detailed questions about my family's finances, about my late father's assets, about legal documents." Trevor stopped walking, his confidence cracking. "You targeted my sister," I continued. "Not because you loved her, but because you needed access to family money to cover what you stole in Colorado." Madeline sat back down heavily, her face in her hands. The bridesmaids looked at each other in shock. My mother was doing something I'd never seen before. She was smiling. Not a polite social smile. A genuine smile of what looked like relief. "Thank God," she whispered, loud enough for people near her to hear. "Thank God someone finally said it." The room went silent again, everyone now staring at her. She walked to me, took the microphone from my shaking hands, and faced the crowd. "Everything my daughter just said is true," she announced. "I discovered it 3 weeks ago. I hired a private investigator after Trevor asked too many questions about our family trust. I found out about Colorado, about the fraud, about his real intentions." Madeline looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, what are you?" "I tried to stop this wedding," my mother continued, her voice breaking. But Madeline wouldn't listen. She said I was being paranoid, that I was jealous of her happiness, that I was trying to control her. She turned to me, and her eyes were full of tears. "So I uninvited you. I kept you away because I knew if you showed up, if you caused enough disruption, if you asked enough questions in front of all these witnesses." She gestured at the crowd. The truth would have to come out, and Madeline would be protected. My mind spun. "You wanted me to crash the wedding?" "I knew you would," she said softly. "You're the only one in this family who's ever had the courage to fight back." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests shouting questions. Bridesmaids rushing to Madeline, who was sobbing into her hands. Groomsmen looking at each other in confusion, unsure whether to defend Trevor or abandon him. Trevor himself stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions, denial, anger, calculation. Then he did exactly what guilty people do. He ran. He turned and bolted for the exit, shoving past guests. 2 groomsmen moved to follow him, but my mother's voice cut through the noise. "Let him go," she commanded. "The police are already on their way." That stopped everyone cold. "You called the police?" Madeline's voice was barely audible, thick with tears. "To your own daughter's wedding?" My mother's shoulders sagged, years of careful composure finally cracking. "I called them 2 days ago, after I confirmed everything the investigator found. They've been building a case, waiting for the right moment to." The main entrance doors burst open, and 3 uniformed officers walked in, followed by 2 people in plain clothes who had "detective" written all over them. The lead detective scanned the room. "Trevor Matheson?" "He just ran out the service entrance," someone called out. 2 officers immediately split off in that direction. The detective approached the head table, pulling out a badge. "Mrs. Parker? I'm Detective Rivera. We spoke on the phone." My mother nodded, looking suddenly exhausted. "It's done then? We have enough to bring him in for questioning. The evidence you provided, combined with what Colorado sent over, builds a strong case. If you could identify him. There's no need, Vanessa interrupted, stepping forward. She held up her phone, showing a photo. That's him. Trevor Matheson. I have about 50 wedding photos with perfect close-ups. The detective smiled grimly. That'll help. Thank you. I was still standing near the DJ booth, trying to process what was happening. My mother had orchestrated all of this. The uninvitation, the investigation, everything. She'd used me as a weapon. The thought should have made me angry. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and something close to respect. My mother approached me slowly, like she was afraid I might run too. I know you have questions. That's an understatement. She glanced around at the crowd, still recording, still watching. Could we talk somewhere private? I looked at Madeline, still at the head table, surrounded by bridesmaids trying to comfort her. My sister, the golden child, who for the first time in her life looked absolutely shattered. Part of me wanted to gloat, to rub her face in this disaster. But another part, the part that remembered us as kids, before the favoritism got so bad, before everything became a competition, just felt sad. In a minute, I told my mother. First, I need to understand something. I walked over to Madeline. Her bridesmaids parted nervously, creating a path. Up close, her expensive makeup was completely destroyed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Did you know? I asked quietly. About Colorado. About what he was planning. She looked up at me, and for once, there was no superiority in her expression. Just devastation. No, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I thought, her voice broke. I thought he loved me. And despite everything, despite years of being second best and overlooked and made to feel worthless, I felt sorry for her. He fooled all of us, I said. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was acknowledgement. Madeline's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. She couldn't finish. Before I could respond, one of the officers returned. We have him. He was trying to get to his car. The detective nodded, then turned to my mother. We'll need statements from both you and the bride. And you, she looked at me. If you have those text messages you mentioned, we'll need those too. I handed over my phone, showing Sophie's screenshots of Trevor's questions from months ago. The detective photographed them with her own device. This helps establish premeditation, she said approvingly. He was clearly researching the family's assets before the engagement. My mother sank into a chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I should have stopped it sooner. But I kept thinking Madeline would see reason. That she'd notice something was off. And then when she wouldn't listen, she looked at me, her eyes red. I knew you were the only person stubborn enough to actually show up after being uninvited. The only person who'd cause enough disruption to force the truth out in front of witnesses. If I just quietly called off the wedding, Trevor would have convinced Madeline I was lying. He would have driven a wedge between us and tried again later. So you turned me into a bomb, I said. I turned you into the truth, she corrected. Which is what you've always been in this family, Emily. The one person willing to say what everyone else pretends not to see. The priest approached us then, looking relieved. I'm glad you called the police when you did, Mrs. Parker. When those documents came across my desk during the marriage prep, I knew something wasn't right. A man with 3 different names on official paperwork, employment history that didn't match what he'd told the bride. Wait, Madeline said, looking up. What do you mean 3 different names? The priest's expression turned sympathetic. Trevor Matheson is the name he's using now. But he was born Trevor Brennan. And in Colorado, he was operating under Trevor Morrison when the embezzlement occurred. Madeline made a sound like she'd been punched. My mother stood and wrapped her arms around my sister, who collapsed against her, sobbing. For the first time in years, I saw them as they used to be, mother and daughter, without the performance, without the pretense. Just 2 people holding each other while everything fell apart. The detective cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but we need those statements. The sooner we process this, the better. Of course, my mother said. She looked at me over Madeline's head. Will you stay? Please? I know I have no right to ask, but I'll stay, I said. Because despite everything, despite the years of hurt and exclusion and favoritism, they were still my family. And right now, my family needed me. The irony wasn't lost on me that it took a disaster to finally be invited to the table. But I'd take it. For now. The police set up in a side room, converting what was supposed to be a gift storage area into a makeshift interrogation space. The reception hall had transformed from a celebration into a crime scene, guests clustering in shocked groups, trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. Most of them were leaving. The valet area was chaos, everyone suddenly remembering urgent appointments or claiming they'd only come for the ceremony anyway. Within 30 minutes, the 300-person reception had dwindled to maybe 50 people, close family, the wedding party, and the intensely curious. I sat in the hallway outside the police room, waiting my turn to give my statement. Madeline had gone first, her voice carrying through the thin door, broken, confused, answering questions about how she'd met Trevor, what he'd told her about his past, when she'd first noticed anything strange. The answer to that last one seemed to be never. She'd never noticed anything strange, because she'd never thought to look. My mother emerged from her own statement, looking drained. She spotted me and sat down heavily in the chair beside mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I know you're angry," she finally said. "I don't actually know what I am," I admitted. "You used me, but you also protected Madeline. And in some weird way, you trusted me to do what no one else could." She nodded slowly. "You were always the strong one. I see that now. I spent so many years thinking Madeline needed more because she was fragile, because she couldn't handle struggle the way you could. I gave her everything, and in doing that, I made her weak." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from her. "When did you figure it out?" I asked. "About Trevor." 2 months ago. He asked about the family trust, try to make it sound casual. "Just want to understand the family finances before we merge our lives. That kind of thing." But he was too interested in the details. "Too specific about your father's estate." She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of a legal document. "That's when I hired the investigator. It took 3 weeks to trace his real history. The name changes. The Colorado fraud case. The pattern of targeting women from wealthy families." My stomach turned. There were others? 2 that we know of. 1 in Denver, 1 in Phoenix. Both times, he got engaged, gained access to family accounts, then disappeared before the wedding with whatever he could transfer out. But he actually married Madeline. Because our money is tied up tighter. Trust funds, legal protections your father put in place before he died. Trevor couldn't just grab it and run. He needed legitimate access, which meant actually going through with the marriage. The door opened, and Detective Rivera gestured to me. "Miss Parker? We're ready for you." I stood, then turned back to my mother. "Why didn't you just tell Madeline the truth?" Her expression crumpled. "I tried. She said I was being paranoid. That I'd never approved of anyone she dated. That I was jealous she was getting married and building a life while I was alone." She wiped at her eyes. She said if I kept pushing, she'd cut me out of her life entirely. So my mother had chosen the nuclear option. Burn everything down to save what mattered. I walked into the interrogation room. Detective Rivera sat across from me, a recorder running on the table between us. "This is informal," she assured me. "We just need your perspective on the events leading up to today." I told her everything. The uninvitation text. Sophie's messages about Trevor's questions. My decision to come anyway. What I'd observed at the reception. "And your mother never told you about the investigation?" the detective asked.
"No."
I thought I was just crashing a wedding out of spite. Rivera smiled slightly. "Your mother's approach was unconventional, but it worked. By creating a public confrontation with witnesses, she ensured Trevor couldn't claim this was a private family dispute or that we were harassing him. Everything that happened today happened in front of 300 people and at least 50 camera phones. So it's over? He's actually going to face consequences. Between the Colorado evidence and what your mother documented here, suspicious financial requests, attempts to access restricted accounts, the false identities, we have a solid case. He's looking at multiple fraud charges across state lines, which makes it federal." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. When I emerged from the room, I found Madeline waiting in the hallway. She'd changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a sweater someone must have brought her. Without the elaborate styling, she looked younger. Vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. We found a small alcove away from the remaining guests. Madeline sat on a velvet bench, and I stood, not quite ready to lower my guard completely. "I've been awful to you," she said. "For years. Maybe forever." I didn't disagree. "I always thought I was better than you. Smarter. More successful. More loved." Her voice broke. "But you're the one Mom trusted when it mattered. You're the one who had the courage to show up even when you weren't wanted. You're the one who," she stopped, wiping her eyes. "You're the one who saved me from making the worst mistake of my life." "Mom saved you," I corrected. "I was just the chaos agent. You could have stayed home. You could have let me marry him and lose everything. Part of me wonders if I would have done the same for you." The honesty in that admission surprised me. "I didn't come here to save you," I said. "I came here because I was tired of being erased. The fact that it helped you was just a side effect." She nodded, accepting that. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if we can fix this. But I want you to know, I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry it took something this catastrophic for that to happen." Before I could respond, Sophie burst through the main entrance, wild-eyed and out of breath. "Oh, thank God you're okay," she gasped, pulling me into a hug. "I've been calling you for an hour. Your phone's off. The police have it. For evidence." She pulled back, looking around at the disaster of the reception. "This is insane. Are you okay? Is anyone hurt?" "Just pride in bank accounts," I said. Sophie noticed Madeline then, and her expression hardened. You've treated her like garbage since we were kids." "I know," Madeline said quietly. "You're right." That seemed to deflate Sophie's anger. She'd clearly been prepared for a fight, not an admission. My mother appeared from around the corner, carrying 3 paper cups of coffee from somewhere. She handed them out wordlessly, and the 4 of us stood there in the ruins of a wedding reception, drinking terrible coffee and trying to figure out what came next. "The venue manager wants to know what to do with the cake," my mother said absurdly. "And the photographer is asking if we still want the posed family portraits." We all looked at each other. Then, impossibly, Madeline started laughing. It was the kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion and shock and the absolute absurdity of life. My mother joined in, then Sophie, then finally me. We stood there laughing in a destroyed ballroom while police processed evidence and Trevor sat in a squad car outside, and somehow it felt more real than any family gathering we'd ever had. 3 weeks later, I sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Newark, holding the key to my father's safety deposit box. My mother sat beside me. Madeline was on my other side. We'd come together, the 3 of us, to finally open what my father had left behind. The lawyer slid the box across the desk. "Take your time." I inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside were documents. Legal papers I didn't immediately understand. But there was also a letter, addressed to me in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "Emily, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally decided to look. I hope it didn't take too long. I hope you didn't let your mother and sister convince you that you weren't worth fighting for. In this box is evidence of a separate trust one created for you before I got sick. Your mother doesn't know about it. I made sure of that. It's not as large as the family trust, but it's yours alone. No one can touch it. No one can change the terms. I know I failed you while I was alive. I let your mother play favorites. I let Madeline take more than her share. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, but that was cowardice talking. You deserved a father who fought for you, and I wasn't that man. This is my attempt to fix what I can. Use this money to build a life that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Don't tell them about it unless you want to. It's yours. I'm sorry I waited until I was dying to be brave enough to protect you. Love, Dad." The lawyer cleared his throat. "The trust is worth approximately $400,000. It's been accruing interest since your father's death. Current value is closer to $450,000. I stared at the papers, unable to speak. My mother's hand covered mine. "He never told me," she whispered. "I had no idea." "He was protecting me," I said. "From you." "From Madeline. From Trevor. Even though he died before Trevor showed up." Madeline was crying silently beside me. "He knew. He knew how we treated you, and he tried to fix it." We sat there in that office, 3 women who'd spent years playing roles in a broken family, finally seeing each other clearly. Eventually, we left. Stood on the sidewalk outside, not quite ready to separate. "Do you want to get coffee?" my mother asked hesitantly. "Actually talk. No performance. No pretending." I looked at both of them. My mother who'd used me as a weapon to save my sister, and my sister who'd finally admitted she'd been cruel. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." We found a small place around the corner. Ordered coffee and pastries. Talked for 3 hours about things we'd never discussed, hurt and regret, and all the ways families break each other trying to hold together. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never completely. but it was a start. That night, driving home to my apartment, I thought about the text message that started everything. "You're not invited to the wedding." My mother had been right about one thing. Being uninvited was the biggest invitation I'd ever received. An invitation to stop accepting crumbs. To stop being invisible. To crash through walls instead of waiting politely for doors to open. I'd spent 28 years waiting to be chosen. It turned out I just needed to choose myself.